What do you get when you mix brutal roguelike and cute virtual pet mechanics together? The answer is tRrLM2 by NIS for the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch. This game was personally both the most tedious and the most addictive game I've played in recent memory. There are no difficulty levels to choose, and the game shocked me when it literally just thrusted me straight into a dungeon after a brief video of a retro PC boot up sequence. At first, there's no tutorials, no guidance, no story briefing. It was simply just straight into dungeon gameplay. I never played the first game in the series as I was never really sure what it was about and never cared to look into it, which is probably why playing this felt so jarring, as I got the initial impression the game was resuming immediately after the events of the first. It made me nervous as to how I'd review the game, but really quickly the gameplay transitioned into sort of a reset trope, and the tutorials began a step at a time. You play as a cool little robot in some sort of subterranean, futuristic, post-apocalyptic world. In your care is a human girl, the last of her kind. She is very susceptible to this world, corrupted by rogue robots and a contaminating fungus. So it's the robot's job to care for her, which is where the digital pet management system comes into play, and the title of the game, including the word Terrarium. I'll say at first this game throws a lot at you and it feels overwhelming, but the first set of tutorials are only the beginning. To sum it up, you'll start off learning basic dungeon mechanics. It's relatively easy, and I've seen it compared to Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. You leave your safe area and enter the dungeons for the purpose of finding materials and resources to craft the best habitat for your little human. You go through a series of randomly generated floors, fighting enemies, finding items, and avoiding traps. Inventory management is huge, as you only have so much room to carry a wide number of resources, and you'll need to decide what your best options are to balance your runs as long as possible. You'll find healing items, weapons, armor, and throwables like bombs, which assist you in fights, food which you use to feed your human, and blueprints which you can use to craft new items for the terrarium at home. To make inventory matters more complicated, you'll also need to pay attention to the material conversion of resources in your inventory. When you die, because that's an absolute certainty, you are unable to bring most resources back with you directly. Every item you carry will be broken down and converted into generic crafting resources, which you'll use along with blueprints to create items for the terrarium. Obviously, there are some exceptions to this, as blueprints can't be broken down, so you just automatically get them for no explained reason. And then there's food, which you need to keep as food so it doesn't get broken down either, but instead is allowed to be placed in a small transfer area upon death. I'd complain that requiring some items to use a special transport while others doesn't make sense, but honestly with this game, I'll take any break I can get. Combat is also a main feature of dungeons, and you'll spend quite a lot of time battling enemies on each level in hopes of leveling up to be powerful enough to keep you going. You essentially have three main ways of attacking enemies: by hitting them, by throwing a bomb or grenade at them, or by using a skill if you have one. 99.99% of the time, I found myself using basic attacks and saving bombs for surprising or overwhelming situations, and only using skills when I felt especially well equipped. Most of my reasoning behind this was due to the fact that if I use throwables, that's less resources I'm bringing back home, and if I use skills, that's less energy I have to continue my journey. Speaking of energy, along with a health bar that depletes as you get attacked or trapped, you also need to manage your robot's energy levels. You always start off your dungeon runs at level 1 with full health and energy. As you walk around the map, your energy levels deplete, and once you reach 0 energy, you'll start taking health damage up to the point of your death, or at least until you find and use one of the many battery items in the world. Every enemy you defeat will grant you a boon of experience, and when you reach enough, you'll level up, increasing your stats and allowing the player a choice of 2 random benefits, which range from incredibly helpful to you just saying, oh well, and hoping for better picks next level. Some benefits come in the form of boost to your stats, or boost to your stats when you're below a certain health point, while others grant you skills or increased effects when using items. I personally found a few that I never cared for, but definitely see how other players might have a different playstyle than me and would likely find them incredibly helpful. The last thing I wanted to inform you about the dungeons is that in addition to managing your robot while exploring, you actually also still need to be concerned about your human at home while out and about. A little later in the early game, you get a device which shows up in the bottom left of the screen and resembles something you'd see on a Tamagotchi. It shows the health, dirtiness, and corruption level of your human buddy, and allows you to make decisions on when you need to pack it up and get back home to take care of her. I'd expect later in the game you have a better way of doing this, but usually I just freak out and try to quickly get into a fight I can't win so that I can return home. Everything I just said is basically one of two parts of the game. The second major gameplay element, and the entire reason why you go into the dungeons anyway, is the terrarium stuff. So you have a little girl, which I should probably start properly calling Horuko now, and she's quite possibly the last human alive. She's a bit worse for the wear though, and obviously as her entire race has perished to this hostile Last of Us fungal takeover thing, she's in desperate need of protection. What better idea than to just stuff her into a terrarium and create a perfect biome for her? Luckily, after the intro event, you and the AI I've never needed to mention before find a gigantic glass jar, or possibly a regular one, and maybe we're all tiny? I haven't got that clarified yet. Anyway, off she goes into a glass jar, and after you gather some materials from the dungeon, we start to build items for the habitat to make things a little nicer for her and allowing you less stress while you're off exploring. You get a nice little tutorial where you make some decorations which show some nice variety between home items like lamps, desks, and chairs, and more natural items like stone spires and grassy mini hills. Shortly after that, they introduce an entire farming mechanic to the biome where you will plant seeds, water them, and later harvest them. To go along with farming, there's also an atmospheric system you're also needing to manage, which allows you to place ventilation and humidifying changes for comfort and plant growth. Lastly, there's a few other items to manage as well, such as the cleanliness of the space, which you fix by sweeping a broom, and there's also some electricity management you have to do in conjunction with placing the atmosphere-related devices. It's definitely a lot and can be a mix of overwhelming and peaceful fun depending on what you're trying to manage. Overall, I was kind of surprised by Void Terrarium 2 for multiple reasons. The dungeon parts of the games felt way more brutal than what I expected, and there's a ton more mechanics, thankfully, with a slow, smooth rollout into gameplay though. The music is a massive highlight, and I couldn't recommend enough if you're going to get the game, the Switch is an excellent platform for it, as the gameplay feels really at home as a portable grab-and-go experience. Generally in these videos, I like to mention who I think would enjoy the game the most. However, being that this wasn't something I would even expect to like myself, but ended up enjoying a lot, it's really hard to say. If you get the opportunity, I'd suggest really anyone at least try the game, as it's surprisingly addictive despite the highly repetitive gameplay and so-called grind needed to progress. Check out Void Terrarium 2 for PS4 and Switch, coming out on March 3rd, 2023. And a huge thanks to NIS America for providing a review copy of the game and support for small creators.